make my work better, right? There's like anxiety or something.
I have one word to get started.
DISA always made my work better.
It's my pleasure on behalf of NASA to welcome Jere Confrey. A little introduction. She's at North Carolina State University. She's the Joseph D. Moore Distinguished Professor of Mathematics Education at North Carolina State University. She's currently designing interactive diagnostic assessment systems built on learning trajectories. She won the Innovator of the Year Award in 2013 at NCSU. Dr. Confrey was named an AER Fellow in 2017. She served on the National Validation Committee on the Common Core State Standards. She was Vice Chairman of the Mathematics Sciences Education Board of the National Academy of Sciences from 1990 to 2004. And she chaired the NRC committee, which produced on evaluating curricular effectiveness, and was a co-author of NRC Scientific Research and Education. She co-founded the UTeach program at the University of Texas in Austin. And Dr. Confrey received her PhD in Mathematics Education at Yale University. It's our pleasure to welcome her here today.
And we'll see if everything stays connected. It's been one of those sort of post-Halloween days where as soon as one thing starts to work, the next one gets a little wonky. But we'll do whatever works and stays working. Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. There's nothing like better than being invited in by a graduate student organization to give talks. I guess it's because you guys are going to be the future of the field, and it's really an honor. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to try to talk about this topic, and the notion here has to do with this going to scale thing, because that's been a different kind of endeavor for me. But one at this point in my career that's been kind of an interesting challenge. And so we'll go through the talk, but you're welcome to ask questions along the way and make comments or other kinds of things. So let's just sort of enjoy ourselves and see where we end up. No way to do this work by yourself. This is the team I'm working with right now. I just put these two in blue because Emily and Maytel just finished her PhD last May and stayed on as a postdoc. Emily is completing her PhD at UNC under Greg Sisek but working full time for us while she finishes it off. So a lot of when I get to the validation work, it's been done with the two of them. Okay, so I wanted to start with Richard and Celia. I don't know if you all know Celia Hoyles and Richard Noss, but they have always been inspiring to me, and so I started with this particular quote. Because I do think that, to me, learning trajectories fundamentally have to do with this issue, a view of mathematics learning which places at its core the medium of expression and the building of connections between different mathematizations rather than ascending into hierarchies of deep contextualization. So point being, just a fundamental interest in how kids think about this stuff and seeing how to build from their different kinds of ideas. So learning trajectories for me are the notion of, everybody knows start where students are and look at the resources they bring to instruction. And we often have something shared between us about that target concept that we want to reach. What we have learned from a lot of research is that there are landmarks along that way, and there are obstacles that students may run into. And we know something about that stuff in between those two states. And the goal here is to say that's what we need to help teachers know more about, and so that they can really build on the reasoning of the kids in their classes and help them to become more successful. In our work, we've settled on this climbing wall, because although you'll see the representation of a learning trajectory like a ladder and some of the things that I'll show you, it's really not like a ladder. It's much more like there's a climbing wall, and you're trying to get some predictability about these things that are the obstacles and these handholds, and your assumption is that people will start at different points, but they will move towards the top of the wall. And there is something common between where this kid is and this kid is, in that if they fell, a little gross, but if they fell, it's the same distance down. So you can kind of say how high off the ground they are, but it isn't the case that they have to go the same path. All right, so it's really important to understand what these things are. What do we build them out of? Over time, building all these different learning trajectories, we find that we build them out of different kinds of things, like a naive or a partial conception. And I'm not going to go through all the examples here, and I will make the slides available if anybody would like them. But for instance, we know that when kids start talking about a lot of data and trying to see patterns in data, they're going to list all the data in order from small to large, and they're going to treat that as what's called a case plot. And they're not going to be concerned about gaps. So when they plot it, they're just concerned about frequency, but no gaps. And therefore, there's no scale. All right? And that's a first part of display. Many kids will do that. So it's a partial conception or a limited representation. The idea that tables of values are so powerful in ratio equivalence. And so trying to have students work with tables of values is one of the targets that you might have. Or another example might be, it can be a strategy. Like they have a way to work with parallelograms in terms of how to find area, different kinds of area. We also know that early on, particular cases are really important. Like when the students are making less in equivalent ratios, they can make less if they have a common two. If you give them eight lemons and 10 cups of sugar water and you say make less, they can tell you 4 and 5. But if you give them 9 and 12 and you have a common 3, they won't get it. Not right away. They'll get it at a different level. So your cases may have to be limited as you move up the trajectory. Properties, the whole notion, for instance, the inverse relationship between unit size and number of units. The people who've done research on area have shown us over and over again that it takes kids time to recognize the unit's smaller, they're going to have a larger number, and it's still the same amount of area. Or another big one that we see, that we use a lot, is the notion of reversibility of schemes. In equal partitioning, a really valuable kind of reasoning on the part of kids is they know that if they share, say, 5 things, something among 5 people, they may be able to tell you that they each got 1/5. But if you said to them, how big was that whole compared to that amount that that individual kid gets, they often can't tell you that the whole is 5 times as big. So you don't get both sides of a scheme developing at the same time, and trying to think about that is helpful in building these things. So those are just a few examples of the kinds of things these things are built out of. And those things don't come for free. It isn't the case that you can just logically take a concept and try to take it apart and then know that you're going to find those things. It's not a logical deconstruction. You have to study kids. You have to talk with them. You have to watch them solve tasks. You have to watch them solve interesting problems. So this slide is just a slide to say, because a lot of people are talking about learning trajectories these days, and we don't all mean the same thing by any means. So what are learning trajectories? Well, first off, they're domain-specific models. It's not about math in general, it's about the math you're learning. They're not general or universal principles. They're not things that we can say will hold under any conditions forever for the rest of history. They're expected probabilities. They are not stage theories. It's not a Piagetian stage theory that says I have to I'm going to master everything forever and always below this to get on to the next one. They're empirically based models of student thinking. They are not logical mathematical deconstructions. You don't get to sit in a room and think of them. You can sit in a room and think about them, and that's an interesting starting place for building your tasks and thinking about what you're going to do. But if you haven't done research with kids on them, then in my book, they're not learning trajectories. This is important just because they're listed by rich or novel tasks. We're talking a couple times today, we've been talking about methodologies. Really important that our methodologies have to do with design experiments and teaching experiments. These are not everyday school tasks. In order to hear that kind of thinking on the part of students, you have to give them interesting tasks so they're going to provoke their thinking and have them tell you how they're reasoning about it. If you just give them something they don't know, they're not going to be able to do it. You're going to say they can't do it, and then we don't get anywhere, right? So you got to give them something that they actually can go to work on, chew on. So it's important that these things that came out of research, they're often emergent in that sense. They include strategies, reasons, I talked about that. They include exploring misconceptions, not just a means to avoid errors. I can't tell you how many people say, "Oh, if you get that chart of all those learning trajectories down, and then we'll come in and we'll find the most efficient strategy, and then we'll teach all the kids to do it that way." And you're like, "No, please don't use my work." They're ordered by increasing sophistication, not by difficulty. And that's an interesting thing to think about. They're connected to big ideas over the long term. They are not just curriculum material. It's not just an idea about instruction. And it's important to understand they're evolving. I do not believe any trajectory that I write is going to be the be-all, end-all trajectories on a topic. They ought to be competing. They ought to be evolving. New tools are going to cause trajectories to develop differently, new ways of thinking. You know, those are all things that those of us that do this work are really fundamentally interested in, is how people actually do reason, and that changes. We were talking today about our Google brains. I'll tell you, my brain does not work. It doesn't work a long time, actually. But it does not work the way it worked before I started Googling everything, right? I don't hold the same things in my memory. I use things very differently. I use my tools differently. That's got to be different. Our kids today grow up on grabbing their phones and checking things, right? So that's going to affect cognition. And so we have to be willing to see these things evolve. Okay. Part 2. Achieving scale while maintaining quality. So we have this research. It's built. Amy's done some of this work on high school. I'm so grateful because I got asked by the OECD to do an international review on learning trajectories, and they said, and we only went upper secondary school. And I said, that won't take me very long. I know who to call and whose work to do really quickly, because you know it's not equally distributed. And so some of her work on the secondary, there's a few more people, but there's not a lot of secondary work, or high school, I should say. Okay, so. But I wanted to see learning trajectories act as a foundation for teachers to use when they're thinking about how to work with students and be more student-centered. So I'm really interested in scale. This is another one from Celia. She said, we have to study how to build evidence-based, sustainable, scalable professional development for teachers using these 4 dimensions of scaling, depth, sustainability, spread, and shift. 4 dimensions of scaling, depth, sustainability, spread, and shift. I'm like, that was fine. To enhance engagement with mathematics at scale, we have to make sure teachers have a chance to tackle the mathematics for themselves using the tools. They have to be part of the co-designing of the activities sequences, and they have to try them out iteratively as a collective effort moving forward. So for me, I like these because it's a vision of going to scale. Going to scale to me is not getting everybody simply to implement. It's to form these communities at scale and think about how the work can function at scale. So the thing we've built is called Math Mapper. It's a software tool that consists of a learning map, my second big learning map that I've built, and it consists of diagnostic assessments of those learning trajectories, and then there's a space for workspace tools and internet resources in the middle. And I'm going to show you one more slide before we go there. The map is structured hierarchically. So you're going to see 4 fields. You're going to see 9 big ideas. And this is where I'm going to kick your butts. Clusters are smaller than big ideas and bigger than constructs. So clusters, constructs, and learning trajectories. Okay, if you can keep that in your head, you're better than I am. All right, so I'm going to drop out for this.
It's on our system.
You can see it. Oh, how come I can't see it? Well, that's funny. Anybody want to tell me how to get out of this thing? I can do the Command Shift Escape, but I may never get back in it. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, that's good.
Now it's over there.
Now it's good. Okay. All right, so this is the software, and when you open it up, you see these. These are the 9 big ideas, and then I can show what they are. So 2 of them are a number, basically working and operating on the number line, ratio, percent. And then 2 in statistics, basically data and chance. 2 in algebra, expressions and functions. And 3 in geometry, measurement, geometric relations, and Cartesian plane. So those are the big ideas, and part of the reason for building this map was that I got tired of them changing the standards. So I said, all right, I'm gonna build this thing around big ideas and you can't change those. And so that's part of what happens. Now, as we come in on this map, you'll see these things change, and they change into these, and these are called clusters. So there's clusters within big ideas, and then each of these little guys is called a construct. All right, so, yeah, I'm gonna go on in. Okay, where else are we gonna go? We're gonna go to ratio. Jere's in the room, we're doing ratio. So here's our ratio in percents, big idea. The first cluster, the things move that way. All my maps move from bottom quarter to the top right, don't ask me why. So the first cluster here is called finding key ratio relationships, and it's consisting of ratio equivalence, base ratio, and unit ratio. And almost always our big ideas have a cluster that's fundamental ideas. Over here you'll see the same thing for percents, finding key percent relations, and you'll see basically percents as relative measure, percents as benchmark percents, and then combination of percents. So all of those are about just fundamental reasoning. And if you can't get that reasoning, you're not going to be able to do the next kind of reasoning. Then this one goes from here into building up to build equivalent ratios, comparing ratios, and finding missing values. All right? So they do this one, and then they do this one. They do percents, and then they do calculating with percents, and then multiplying and dividing rational numbers. So that's how a big idea works, basically. And one thing that this chart does allow you to do is you can come up here and I can say turn off 8th grade, turn off 7th grade, and it will, if I showed you on the map better, you could see what stuff is taught at what grade level. So if it's grade, it's at a later grade level, and it turns out if it's striped, it's at an earlier grade level, so people can see it by grade level. All right, let's go back in here. All right, so we're gonna look in more detail at this particular cluster. And we're gonna start with, let's start with ratio equivalence. If you click on this little guy down here, what it does is it opens up the learning trajectory. So the first thing kids have to understand is what it means for ratios. What does it mean for something to have the same ratio, but it's more? And all of a sudden it's like, wait, how can it be more and be the same ratio? And kids have to engage with that problem fundamentally if they're gonna understand the notion of the invariance in ratio. So what do we know from the research? We know that creating equivalent ratios to make more by multiplying both quantities by the same whole number factor. If you gave kids, say, 8 to 12, and said make more, they're gonna tell you 16 to 24. They might tell you 16, let's go up again, 24 to 36, right? They may go up more, but making more is easier for them than anything else, because they think of it as batches. They make another batch. To get equivalent ratios that make less, they actually can divide by 2. And one of the things I find interesting in the literature, and mathematics people make this mistake all the time, we start little, like we start with like 2 to 5, and then we build up only. But actually, don't start 2 to 5, start in the middle and let them build both up and down, and you will see their reasoning much more profoundly. We just think we have to start simple with everything. And sometimes simple is actually misleading because it's too simple. Then they can make less by dividing both by an odd factor. Then they can learn how to build a table of values instead of the ratio equivalence by always preserving the quantities are multiplied or divided by the same number. And then eventually they can recognize equivalent ratios as points on a plane that lies through the origin. So this is what we call a learning trajectory. These are the maps of the grade level based on Common Core. So if I go into Texas, I can switch the map out to Teaks, and then I can remap the information. If I go to Guatemala, I can do the same thing, so I don't have to have everything, I don't have to rebuild everything. And these little yellow guys are misconceptions. So if you go in on one of these maps and you click on one of them, it'll open up and it will tell you, in this particular area, they believe ratios are equivalent when the same number is added or subtracted. So that's the misconception that's often there, and if you flip that card over, you get the correct conception shown. All right. So these are all over the map, and the other thing that you can do from here is I can come over to this corner, and for that particular learning trajectory, I just open this up, and it shows me the standards that are associated with this learning trajectory. So that's why, what I'm trying to do with teachers, I want their attention on kids. I don't want their attention on standards. I want their attention on kids' reasoning. So by doing it this way, they get reassured. I promise, we covered all standards, but they don't focus on the standards. And one of the reasons for that, if any of you, has any of you ever seen the Turn On CC Math site that I built? Hexagon map? Okay, well, it had one standard in one place, and I didn't like that. I wanted my standards to map multiple places, so this was the new map helps. But if you click on one of these, you'll see I solved that problem for myself, which means it comes back out. And then for that standard, you can see these ones right here is where you got to get that work done. But you can also, the reverse colors here, tell you can also do some work on ratio over there in probability, and if it wasn't covering it, you'd see you can do it up in slope too. But you can see they map multiple places. Okay, so all that makes sense so far? Okay, the other thing I'll show you while we're here, because it's the only time I show you this, is, close that, is that if you're in these guys and you click down here on that little image, what it does is it opens up, and these are resources on the web, free resources that address that topic. And teachers can add their own links to it, and so you can access these free resources, right? We were talking about this earlier today, which is all these teachers out there who are just searching the web by throwing a standard in, and then they're willy-nilly putting curriculum together, just incoherently, standard by standard. And part of what we're trying to do is to think about, is there a notion of coherence that can be driven by learning trajectories and diagnostic assessment that we can use to help solve that problem of everybody going willy-nilly out to the web? So we know they're going to do it. And I don't think that I don't think that's ever going back in the bag. So we better figure out how to help them manage it in such a way that the experience for student makes some sense. And those of you that aren't aware of that, for instance, how many of you have heard of Pearson? So Pearson is selling its entire K-12 print division. It will be out of that business sometime in the next 6 months. That's huge. That's the biggest print distributor in this country, no longer going to do curriculum. They're going to do college curriculum, but not K-12. And the reason's simple. Curriculum in this country is going to be free. It's going to be free, it's going to be on the web, and so we in math ed better figure out how to help people use it more effectively. And part of what we are trying to do is to design and think about how to do that. Okay. All right. All right, now we get back to the story. Let's see, I showed you everything I want to show you here. Yeah, I showed you nothing here. Okay, we're going to go back to me. You doing okay? All right, so we saw this before, so I've talked to you about the structure of this, and I've talked to you a little bit about the structure of this, and now we're going to talk about the structure of this. There's your quiz slide again. And here is an example, but I showed it to you, so I'm not going to go through that again. All right, so now, students come in and they take a test. And what happens is that our tests are tested at the cluster level. So at the cluster level, they can take a test in real time, and I'll tell you a little bit more how it's made in a minute, but they take about a half an hour, and teachers just in the middle of instruction when they're at that point, so that these are not like benchmark assessments, they're not interim assessments, they can use the right assessment at the time that they're teaching that topic, which is really important for them to get the feedback on their instruction in real time. So they go in and they take one of these tests, and then they immediately, the students can see their reports. And immediately the teachers can see their reports. So what happens is the student takes a test, let's say it was the one on ratio equivalence, and they can see that they got an 83% on the ratio equivalence. They can see they got 50% on base ratio problems, and they got 0% on unit ratio. And if for any one of these, that's B, so that would be, B is this one. So for the one they got B, they got, if it's blue, they got it correct. If it's white, they didn't get an item at that level. If it's orange, they got it wrong. So they can immediately see which levels they got correct and look at those different kinds of problems. And I should have done this live, but I didn't. If you scroll down from here, they can see that put into a chart. They see which ones they got right and what wrong. They can click on the ones they got wrong. The item comes back up again, and they're asked, do you want to reveal the answer, or do you want to revise and resubmit? They can revise and resubmit, which they adore. They redo the problem, they resubmit the problem, it tells them if they got it right. If they do get it right, let's say they got this one new problem right, they'll get a green addition on their percent, so they'll know they're making progress on it. They love this display, they find it really easy to work with, and they immediately know what they can do. The teachers get what are called heat maps. So this is what it looks like for the teachers when the data come back. So this is the same 3 constructs, all right? This is a heat map that shows you, these are the 5 levels of the learning trajectory, from low to high. And the kids in the class are ordered from RB here got the weakest score, and LC here got the highest score. Now obviously, we hide the initials. Teacher can just turn the initials off or on so she doesn't display it this way to the class. If they have a white, they didn't get that item. All right, so what the teacher's looking for, she's looking for the pattern across all her kids, and light blue partial credit. Right? So what she's looking for is what we call a Gutman curve. If the lower levels are easier, there's going to be more blue down there, right? And if the upper levels are harder, there's going to be more orange up at the upper levels. Make sense? What you're looking for is you're looking for this kind of curve. Because basically, this kind of curve tells you that all the kids from here over understand these lower levels. And starting about here, you start to get, these kids understand this level, and they're doing okay up to this point. And teachers can look at the class and make immediate decisions about, I need to go in on this class and start at level 3 and really talk about the constructs. And from 3, 4, and 5, I probably should be reteaching that particular content. All right? Or they can decide that they can come down here and say, I need to form a subgroup of these kids, and I need to take these couple kids and really work on this concept more. So the heat maps, the teachers love the heat maps because they tell them really quickly what to do and where to focus their instruction. It also turns out that when the heat map's live, if I have to sign in as a teacher, that's why I didn't do this part live. But I can click right on this problem, and the problem will be put back up on the board, and then I can talk about it with my class. And I can talk about the results by re-talking about the problem. I can hit a little button and it'll show the correct answer, so I can talk to them and say, okay, how many of you got it right, didn't get it right, talk to a neighbor. Or the third thing it actually gives them immediately is an item analysis. It tells them what % of the kids answered which distractor, correct or incorrect, and it also will tell them the % of the kids that show misconceptions, the common misconceptions, same misconceptions that were in the chart. So teachers work with kids with these charts with the whole class. And the whole idea of the model, this is called what's called classroom assessment. The idea of it is you're trying to give teachers and kids feedback, well, they still have time to do something about it. You know, the problem with our classes so often is you teach it, and then at the end you find out people don't understand something, well, what are you gonna do? What do they have to do? They have to go on to the next subject, because their scope and sequence says, do the next topic. And the kids don't understand. So that doesn't work. And what we need is we need something where they give themselves enough time to actually work on it and work for mastery, work to the point where the kids are doing better, retest. So the system also allows, teachers can retest the whole class, or students can retest anytime they want to. And then the third option is practice. Students can go in and they can go into a particular construct and just see all the levels, see how they did on them, and they can choose which level they need to work at. Okay? Now, this just seems like, oh my God, are you kidding, Jere? You're talking about more testing. But the thing is, this testing is about them at the time they need it. They can retest, and they can talk about it amongst themselves. It helps, and because it's learning trajectory based, it helps the teacher to think about what it is the kids know and don't know in an idea. Lots of our teachers know a lot about some things that kids know, but there's a lot of things they don't know a lot about the kids' reasoning. So this is a chance for them to go back in and think about those kinds of ideas and see how to work with them. So let's see if this works. I'm going to play, this is a teacher, one of our schools. Oh, can we go again, not being able to find the cursor? It's going to let me, it's so strange. What happens if I just do that? There's one. Maybe I can get it there. All right, ready? So this is one of our teachers.
All right, so guys, take out your notebooks. I want you guys to open to your SUDDS report for characteristics of circles. All right, so what I want you guys to do is just take a look at the constructs that are up here, because you can see it's broken up into construct A and construct B. Now, construct A was pi and circumference, and construct B was area of the circle. Now, what do you guys tell me? How are you going to go about reading this map? Like, how are you going to read this report that they give you? Because I see a lot of checks, I see X's, different colors. How is it that you read this?
Okay, well, the blue check means that you got full credit for the questions. That means you don't have to like revise it.
Don't need to practice or anything like that. Okay.
And then if you see like the yellow and orange and the yellow X, then you know that you got it wrong and you have to revise it.
All right. So now, does this allow you to go back to the question to look at what your response was?
Yeah. So when you click on the question that you got wrong, there's a tab that says revise or reveal, and you're able to click on it, and then it gives you a second chance to fix it.
Oh, awesome. So the cool thing about SUDDS, though, is that you don't just necessarily have to guess what the second answer is going to be. What you can do is there's a way for you to look at the map on the main page where you can go into geometry, and there's practice based on the level question you got wrong and the cluster that you got wrong in. So if you guys right now go onto the map, so why don't you click on that kind of pin drop point for the map, and go into the geometry and measurement, the first one in the top left. And then if you zoom to the one in the middle, you'll see it says characteristics of circles. I want you to click on that little pencil on the top right corner. And when you see, there's this icon that says practice on, and you can choose practice as well as see my stats. So you can toggle back and forth. If you look at your stats, what I want you guys to do now, kind of discuss with one another, because I paired you guys together because you guys have very similar questions, right and wrong. Look at the stats, see what level and what construct you guys didn't get right, you didn't maybe misunderstood, and then you can do some practice within that construct. So why don't you guys take a look at there, see what level you want to use, talk to each other, and then kind of work through the practice problems together, and then you revise and revisit your questions. Go for it.
We got number 9 wrong. So basically when I look and I see construct A, I see pi circumference, it shows that L2, or meaning level 2, with estimating pi by comparing the lengths of circumference to the diameters ratio. It looks like I got that wrong, which means that I would need, I think we would need more practice in that activity that would help us.
And then level 1.
And in this,
I have level 1, level 6, level 5, level 3 are all blue.
Yeah, so we got those right. And then for the top one, construct E.
Yeah, we level 2 and level 3.
is that for
Level 4 lines up with how they're me, which means more of I'm pretty good, but I can still
basically what it does?
Yeah.
So I hope that part of what you can see in there is that the kids can take responsibility for their own work. And my general notion is that students are about the most underutilized resource in schools. And one of the basic notions of this whole classroom assessment orientation is to change people's thinking so that kids and teachers work together to accomplish the learning that has to happen in classrooms. That seems so trivial, but it's really not. In fact, one of the things that's very difficult is for the teachers to shift to this way of thinking and talking. That when they first start using MathMapper, and we study them as they return data so we can try to see how they did it, because we didn't know how to do it, they just treated an item as an item. In other words, here's an item, I'm gonna go over it with the class. And by the way, I told you guys should have used a table, because the table's a really great way to solve it, and they just walk through and tell them how to do the problem, right? And that wasn't really helping the kids. And it also wasn't using the learning trajectory, because they aren't using the fact that that item represents a level, and that level represents a location in coming to a more sophisticated understanding. Our more sophisticated teachers, it takes about a year and a half, start to actually treat the level as meaning something, a construct, that they're trying to think about how that thing sits in within the other parts of what's happening. I mean, a quick story on that. We had a teacher who had taught 5th grade, came to 6th, not strong math, and she started teaching 6th grade, and really her math was weak. And she was using the learning trajectories for percent. She taught something on percent to her class. They took the assessment. She looked at the result, and she said to the class, "Oh, where do we need to work?" And the whole class goes level 3, orange all the way across. She says, "Yep, looks like we do." So they go over to level 3. She opens the item. The item's about a puppy that weighs 25 pounds and has grown to 50 pounds. And the question is, what's percent of its weight? And she, all of a sudden, she looks up at the class and goes, "Oh, I forgot to teach you guys percents above 100. She said, "That's on me. You know, I just forgot." And I'll tell you, if you look at that standard, look that standard up. That standard says, teach percent the whole part in the, whatever the third thing is that's there. It says nothing about percents above 100. It's the most pitiful little standard on percent. And when we know that teachers spend 6th and 7th grade, they probably spend a couple months on those topics, and yet it's one little standard that doesn't really say anything about those different kinds of areas. And so she looked at it, and then she went to the class, and they had this great discussion about 25 pounds and 50 pounds, and some of the kids were saying it was 50%, not 200%. She got into that with them. And then they went on and looked at some more of their data, and there was one that was a little bit higher, which everybody also got wrong. And it turned out that was 245%. There was a problem based on that. But once the kids had those two discussions, they had enough to go to work on that 245% problem. And she worked it with the class, and the class showed like 6 different ways to solve that problem, including doing a rational number multiplication by something like 24.5 or something. And she's like, "Oh my God, how did you do that?" But the point is, it's just, this is not brain science. If we just can help people know what they're missing and think about what needs to be put in there to fill them in, and then recruit kids as our partners in going to work on the areas in which they have holes, we can get a ton more out of the system than we're getting out of the system right now. Instead, what we do is we move on, and then by next year, then that stuff's even deteriorating more, and you gotta do it all over again. So, you know, that's the fundamental notion. It doesn't seem that amazing or anything, but it makes a huge difference in the classroom. Seriously. Really, I am usually pretty competent with it. It's not going forward. How did I get out
So
of
it
this?
opened an extra window, so you don't have to go back to your
Oh, wait,
original
just-
presentation.
Maybe I could get over.
That's the full screen.
That's not helping me, is it?
Nope.
Dang. All right, do you have a better idea?
Is it one of these tabs across the top, these yellow ones? This is
No,
what happens.
to the back.
Oh, behind this window.
Yeah.
Is it this here?
Yeah.
So just click in this section right here.
If I can get.
Yeah.
Come on, baby.
Yeah, click.
Gotta reverse your brain to do
Ooh, you guys are good. I'm not touching it, doing anything else. Okay, so that's the first two halves of the top. The first one being what are learning trajectories. The second being, here's something that's going to scale. It's learning trajectories across grades 6 through 8, and it's getting systematic data back to teachers and students that's domain specific to what's happening in classrooms, and they can use it to revise instruction. We study the teachers using this with their kids because we want to learn from them how to understand what's going on. And so now here's the third part of that, and that is validation. So these are tests, which means they sit in the world of psychometrics, and there are reasons to be concerned about whether these tests are valid and reliable. And so we don't just want to be giving tests, but we want to make sure the tests are working and that they're fair and everybody gets opportunities to learn. So the unique challenges of validation for classroom assessments, and I tell you this because, well, first off, I'll tell you one of the reasons, and that is math educators are really slow to get into this stuff. And the thing is, this is driving what's going on in the field out there. The country is in a gallop. They know curriculum's going away. The Elementary and Secondary Act was passed, and this Congress doesn't want to reinforce too much, I mean, this particular administration doesn't want to reinforce too much stuff about high-stakes testing or public schools in general. So they're giving waivers to all the states can have a waiver to get out of using high-stakes tests. And those waivers, the big competition out there is for what can replace high-stakes tests. You can have there's two things that you can do in these waivers. You can either try to find something that you can show predicts scores on high-stakes tests, or you can try to build things that replace high-stakes tests. And your state and somebody at your college is actually building systems that are taking part in that competition across the country. But it's gonna go open up humongously in the next few years. And in order to play in that game, you have to know something about measurement, or you have to partner with people who know something about measurement. That's perfectly good too. So, and this whole area called classroom assessments, anybody know who NCME is? Measurement Evaluation, right? National Council of Measurement Evaluation. They meet simultaneously with AERA, and they are the measurement people. And they run through the conference and do their thing, and we run through the conference and do our thing, and every once in a while there's a few people that go to both, right? But they have opened up special conferences on classroom assessment because they are realizing that the models they use for high-stakes testing are not going to be sufficient for classroom assessment. The rules of validation and validity just aren't going to be the same. So part of this is learning how to figure out what are the unique challenges for validation. Well, you have different grade size in the constructs. You have multiple purposes, including this. All of this depends on instruction. This is not instruction free. So how do you think about something being valid if you don't know what the opportunity to learn is? The role of learning theory, such as learning trajectories, is guiding the work, which was not true in high-stakes testing where it's just domain sampling. and it's limited, a lot of this work hasn't been done at the size of a curriculum. So, this slide was supposed to be gone. Okay, so we built these guys, and they built these assessments. They're 8 to 12 items. We have 4 forms of items, and we make inferences at the class level, not the student level. And we've built a validation method. So I just want to show you enough about that to get some idea of the work in case you guys end up being interested in this kind of work. There's something called item response theory, which is the theory that we use on our work. There's also CDMs, cognitive diagnostic models. There's Bayesian modeling. There's about 5. There's latent trait modeling. There's like 5 models that people use on this stuff. And then when we do our work, we go in and we look at the data. So the data will show us by level. So here are my levels in my trajectory. And this is an IRT analysis. And this is the item difficulty. So the item difficulty, I'm not going to go into any detail. It's measured in logits, measured against scale. But what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the items at the low levels to be easier and the items at the higher levels to be harder. All right, so that makes sense. And so I've got to see if that actually happened when I built the trajectories based on the actual constructs. And there's lots of arguments, like, does this level have to be all higher than this level? Or can it overlap? Does it have to be on average higher? And the same thing goes all the way up. Do you ever want an item that's up here? It's only a level 3 item that's way up there, or do you want to get rid of that item? Do you want an item down here that's too easy? And if you leave too many items that are out of the design, you have a hard time knowing how to validate your models. So the way that we do our work, what we've invented, and actually have invented for ourselves, is something called iterative regression. And you guys know linear regressions, math people. So you basically are running a linear regression on this. We find out which items look like they're non-conforming. We don't assume they're non-conforming. The learning science team goes in and looks at each one of those items opposite the construct. This is what didn't used to happen in psychometrics. The psychometricians would just throw these items out and just say, ick, we don't like them. And slowly but surely over time, the test got worse and worse because the items are more and more like each other, and they're terrible items. And so we're trying to figure out how to develop this field so that you can have variety in the kinds of items at the same time as you are trying to get things to be more and more valid. So we go in and we look at them, and the learning science team, psychometrics team hands it over to the learning science team. Learning science team will revise or retire items. We may retain an item if we love it and flag it just to say, it's at that level, it's a little harder than we think it should be, but it's great discussion item, so we're not getting rid of it. Or it's too easy, but that's okay because some of the kids that might not think they'll ever learn that stuff, we can help them. We'll revise the levels. If we think we're wrong, if the levels aren't working right, we might redo the levels, so we might flip items completely because we actually didn't get them in the right order. And sometimes everything goes to hell and we rebuild the whole cluster. So this is huge. Just think about doing this work at scale. I mean, it's a huge undertaking at scale. And part of my point again is we've got to serve schools at scale. We cannot just keep having research. Teachers can't go out and just find this little piece of research here and this little piece of research there. We've got to figure out how to embed it in practice in ways that can actually serve all the kids in all the schools that are out there, and we can help teachers strengthen their content knowledge. So we do this as an iterative process. Every single year we go through this process on every single cluster, and then we're really excited because next year we're going to find out whether they behave better. So if our model's working, these clusters will behave better on the next round of data gathering, and if our method fails, it's not scientific, it's not giving us the results, then we're going to have to redo the whole method. So we have done across the map, remember there's a lot of constructs, and you can see it's not bad. I mean, for a first shot of all those constructs, these are all your different lines. So you don't see too many of them that are really sticky. Of course, maybe they're putting in those things. You know, that's not looking great. That's multiplication and division of decimals, pretty flat. That was really not looking great. Statistic representing ordering integers and absolute values. We've redone that cluster since then. So we have done the 24 clusters, 62 constructs. We've done validation of 19 of the 24 clusters. 64% of them has shown us evidence of a strong LT structure. 11 of 44, we need more data, because if you try to get data from schools doing this stuff in real time, they don't, gosh, I hate to tell you this, but schools aren't teaching statistics because it's post-test, and they're not teaching geometry. They're not actually doing anything post-test, they're not doing much with. So getting that data takes more work, and so those areas just needed more data. Only 5 of the 44 constructs had to be completely reworked, and we still got a few to go for this year. And these are some examples of how we adjust. You know, the point I guess here is our learning science team, and you know, we know how to adjust an item, make it easier or harder. Add a fraction. It's gonna get harder, right? Make it multi-step, boom. You know, so it's not magic. So the point is, we can move them, but but our point of view is that what we're really interested is understanding what's the variance that accounts for the movement up the trajectory, and then how do you describe the variance within a level, and then thirdly, how do you get rid of what's called item irrelevant variance, bad writing, bad language, kids can't understand it, awkwardly built, the stuff you're supposed to get rid of. So that's what we do, and I'm not gonna show you all of this. But the part of this that I wanted to say was just, so one of the things that in the work we're doing now at scale is we think of this as 3 groups of people together working on learning trajectories. Learning scientists who've done the research on and study it on how kids learn. Psychometricians who are trying to make sure that these objects of measure have validity and have the right characteristics to be sure that we are making sound judgments on what we're learning about where the teachers should put their time, because we don't want them putting their time arbitrarily anywhere. And practitioners, who are our third partner, who are basically looking at the trajectories and coming back to us and saying, okay, based on the assessments you've given us to work with and based on our work with students, we either think you guys are going in the right direction with these trajectories or we don't think they're in the right direction, in which case we will go in and consider rebuilding these things in light of that. And it's sort of a notion of a classroom as a giant, Rich Lair calls it a giant trading zone, where these 3 groups are working in tandem with each other over time at scale to keep trying to serve the kids better by creating real data for teachers to improve instruction and deepen their own content knowledge. Does that make sense? So next steps, we're working with this notion of situating validation and learning trajectories in this trading zone among learning scientists, psychometricians, and practitioners at scale. We're building in support to help teachers. There's a lot of work to help teachers to change from thinking of assessment as just an outcome to thinking of it as I'll use the trendy term, growth mindset, as something where they're helping the kids see that they can learn and there's very specific things they can do to improve their instruction and that they are in it with them as partners. And I say trendy only because this work came out of the research on formative assessment, and assessment is a learning process. And so I don't want to give the credit away to somebody else because it was built out of that work and then systematized into measurement. And growth mindset just kind of captures the idea for a lot of people. So build support for teachers to do that. Our teachers meet every month and they share the data with each other. They talk through it as a group and they plan for next year based on the results of the data that they're seeing. Super interesting thing to study because all of a sudden they're talking about their content interactions and how they teach them and what they need to do better and do they need to move this content before that content, which is a much deeper level of professional development and has to go on in our schools. It has to go on among teachers in our schools. Help shift towards coordinated systems of assessment. That is, people are looking at the way this kind of assessment ties into larger systems of assessment so that the story for kids will be data over time. Remember I told you that curriculum's gonna be free? No, it's not gonna be free. Data. Data's gonna be paid for. It's gonna be paid for because it's gotta be secure. It's gonna be paid for because we've gotta integrate these different data sources together and figure out how to make different data sources work. So shifting towards this, and also more and more people are trying to document the growth of the kids using these systems over time, across years. We're learning how to model kids' growth across trajectories, across grades, and across schools so that we can keep track of what they're doing. So anyway, that's what I had to share with you today. My goal with it was to try and say, you know, research on learning is fabulous, research on teachers is fabulous, but if we're gonna help the school system out there, we're gonna have to find ways to partner with them at a larger scale and a larger way of interacting so that we systematically are providing support so that teachers have a feeling that they're getting better at what they're doing, because for it to be a profession, you have to know how to get better at it. And these systems are ways that you can at least try to do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Confrey, and all of you for attending. The discussion will continue upstairs in a room, second floor, 224, but we also have time for one or two questions right here for the full group if you would like to ask something.
I have a question. What kind of items do you have, and like how do you get items that are gonna capture explanations and reasoning about quantities?
Yeah. It's a great question. I didn't really describe the items. Most of our items are short answer, multiple choice, matching kind of things, but that's because we're just a little team and we built this whole thing on one grant. So, oh my God, you just have no idea. So we have about 1,200 items that we wrote, and we wrote them ourselves, because the items that are out there really stick, and they have to go to the constructs. But we envision a world, and Desmos people have talked to us too, you know, where you use things like Desmos to create interactive items. And for 3 years, we promised NSF we'd start building interactive items, and we just couldn't keep up with the other work, so we never got to it. But that will, I think that will happen. I mean, I think people, once you get the idea, people can build much richer items than types of items than we're building. I look forward to when people do that. And in terms of explanations, I mean, it's surprising how much you can do. Our teachers call these stretch items. And the kids do have trouble, because all of a sudden when they take them, they're getting 60s, not 90s. And they're like, wait, I'm gonna get a 60? And the teachers have to say, no, you're not gonna get a 60. This is about learning, and it means you have stuff still to learn. And at first the kids are like, I can't do these. And then again, it's the teachers are key, like how they work with the kids and how the kids work with each other. When they start to say, yeah, you can do these items. They're written to be conceptual. And then they get better at them, and then they start to understand it. But item writing is definitely a challenge. Yeah.
Building on that, you mentioned something briefly about like it taking about a year and a half for teachers to start seeing it at
Yeah.
kind of levels. And you mentioned something about like how to support the students in looking at it. Are there any other things that they seem to do in order to be able to make this a successful thing as teachers?
Well, the guy that you saw do that thing where he was having the students practice, he invented that. We never thought of using practice that way. So sometimes we see them do some things like that. Lots of times they have like organizers that they'll try to build to help the students know how to look at their data and think about how to work on it. So we've seen a few of those kinds of things. What else did we see? We found, one thing that we found in the study we did last year was, one of the things that makes a big difference is how well they use the tool. So some of them never get comfortable with the tool and they're afraid to put the heat maps up and they don't click on the items. And then when they go to the items, they tell them how to do it. They don't let the students work together. Some of our more experienced teachers form stations, so they'll actually have they'll have a station when they're working on something in particular. And just looking down the pike too, our district in New Jersey, who's been one-to-one for a long time, they are looking at setting up the schools so that the 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders all take math at the same time. And they're starting to think about putting them all in one area and then letting kids move through things at their own pace. So one of the things that this pushes is a notion of flexible grouping and not just hard grouping all the time. And so that's an area that I think will develop more and more, because a lot of our teachers are asking, can't we automate and give them, tell them what groups to form and stuff like that. If we do it, we'll design it so that we recommend something and they can drag and pull and switch it up themselves. But those are some of the kinds of things that we're starting to see happen in different places. There's a lot of things that change when you actually, because fundamentally we have a ton of diversity in classrooms, right? The hardest thing about teaching now, when I taught, it was maybe a grade above and a grade below. But people are dealing with 2 and 3 grades below and 2 and 3 grades above. You can't do it, so the system's got to break. And we got to rebuild it in such a way that we really allow for people to be working at different paces, but that we don't let that system devolve into individualization, right? We know that doesn't work. We know kids have to talk in groups. And so we are seeing people thinking about, like some of the computer science people are thinking about how to build algorithms that will allow us to figure out how the kids should be grouped over time in ways that are much more flexible than the way we've done it. So it opens a whole lot of space up about the way people can work, but we're really only at the front.
Yeah, will you say a little bit more about these validation studies? What I'm trying to imagine or resolve is, ideally I would like this test question to tell me, like, a positive result on the test question means the child has this construct. Is it that type of validation?
So, no.
Sorry, did that make it harder?
Everybody who sees learning trajectories wants the answer to the question, where are they on the trajectory, as an individual student, okay? But because, say, in one of our clusters, we will have something, on average we have 6 levels per thing. So that's, say there's 3 constructs, that's 18 levels and our tests are 12 items long. There's no way around sampling levels. And so, therefore we can't locate the kid precisely, because not only that, but even if you had 18, that's only 1 item. And to feel like you have valid measures, the rule of thumb is 3 items. So we can't do it. We have thought about how to bring practice data together with regular data and try to get them located. We're still trying to play around with it. In fact, we're running a study in Colorado this fall where we're going to give the kids a test on steroids of all the levels, and we're going to compare it to their results on sampled levels and find out, how much data are we losing? Can we predict with that? So the answer right now is no, I can't. But at the classroom level, because we run 4 forums and sample across the different levels, at the classroom level, those data are valid. The heat maps you saw, because we actually run it through an analysis, get the theta scores and do it based on that. So at the classroom level, those are valid. We could eventually go to an adaptive test and maybe solve the problem, but I'm not convinced learning trajectories and adaptive tests are partners right now. I think because we really think the levels differ from each other, and we're afraid of adaptive tests because they all usually know anything about what NWEA sells to your schools right now and calls as valid tests. They're horrible. Not valid by any stretch of imagination. So the answer to your question is, we want to do it. We conceptually think it should be something we should be able to do. We technically cannot solve the problem yet, and we're trying to puzzle over what the alternatives are and whether we're doing better or not than we thought.
Could you just go a little further then? So the the validation is at the classroom level, but the heat map speaks to each individual child with that child named. So.
Well, the heat map, no, so the kids ordering in the heat map,
Mhm.
now, you know, by the way, of course, when the teachers do that to class, they turn the names off.
Yeah.
But the heat map as an overall model of where the class is, like that you have kids that need these levels and that you need to read,
Yeah.
you know, once you get to level, see, one of the
So
things
the
we're
heat
finding.
map is meaningful.
Writ large, I can tell you, our kids in this country are not learning the top levels. Anything, on anything. They are just not getting, even our top schools, they are not getting the top levels. Now, the only time there's exception to that is if sometimes our top level is an algorithm, you know, because you're like going after the area of circles, and all of a sudden it will perform blue and everything below is orange, because they don't know what they're doing, but they can do formula, and we don't have a good way to test for
Right.
understanding.
Right.
But on the whole, everything that we're seeing is telling us that that's the case. And we look at these diagrams across different, you know, advanced classes, and different classes. So, you know, that's just in general that we need to do that work more. Now, how did I get to that? I don't remember what you asked me before that, but anyway.
I think you answered for me.
Okay,
The heat map is a good description of the classroom.
yes.
But if student A is right here, I might not be as confident that student A is performing at what
Right, I
that
mean,
little
the
color.
the simple problem is, remember those things with the little circles around them and the little dials that go up, right? You could have gotten an easy item or a hard item on that construct. So there's a validity there, because they can look at the item does measure the construct, and they know they got it right or wrong. So it's not like there's no validity, but what's not necessarily valid is, are they at 50% level on that construct? And the fact is, if they took a different test, they might have been at 25% or 75%. So that's what's not valid, because we don't sample enough at the level of the individual construct to be able to be confident of that. But they're interesting problems, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So they're also shifted. So I'm going to.
Thank you for all of you that you do for me.
Oh, Lawler, how are you? Good to see you.
I think she was just referring to you.
Oh, no, don't listen to anything that she says. Yeah, yeah.
I know. Is that why you chose it? These are gonna